When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Welcome to Supernatural Circumstances, the podcast where we take you down the rabbit hole into the fantastic world of the strange, the paranormal, and the unknown. I'm Morgan Knudsen.
And I'm Mike Brown. It's time to dim the lights and settle in. Come along with us on this week's adventure. We're talking to Eben Alexander and Karen Newell again because they're too cool not to talk to a whole bunch of times. Like, oh my goodness gracious, I learned so much every single time we talk to them.
Yeah, every time. And this time's going to be really no exception. I mean, we're going to be branching into the world of something that I think a lot of people have heard about and many people also follow and practice, which is the law of attraction.
Yeah, so let's get into it.
I'm excited. These guys are so great.
Even before we hit record, we were talking already, and so we join the conversation in progress. Morgan is already talking about the Edmonton Oilers because she can't help herself.
Quick side note on the being that we're going to be kind of talking about alignment and stuff like that today. I have to tell you guys this. It's been so interesting watching the Edmonton Oilers win this season because they have been practicing every single thing that we talk about on the show about alignment, about allowing the sort of the universe to work through you.
How do you know this? How do you know?
They're super open about it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Baseball team?
Hockey.
Hockey.
And they're 2 games away from the Stanley Cup right now.
Oh my God. And so they've been visualizing and
all of it.
All of that.
All of it.
And documenting it publicly.
Wow. Yes. Yep. Yeah. They actually hired a fellow who we're going to actually have on the show here in the next couple months who worked with Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan and used the exact same philosophies through meditation, through everything. And that's how they're winning the Stanley Cup. And it's just the coolest thing to watch. It's like everything we talk about in action.
Especially in a sports environment, right? Where that kind of stuff is taboo. And yet, look how effective it is.
Absolutely. It is so cool. And he was brought in by their goalie, Stuart Skinner, who is just such a sweet human being. Like the whole team, they're the sweetest group of guys you'd ever want to meet. And they've really taken this to heart and are working through it. It's phenomenal. So anyway, I had to tell you guys that because it's
great. And they're 20 things. They're in their 20s, hockey players. Yeah.
Anywhere from like 20 to 40.
That's great though. That's the audience that never does this. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's just, it's so cool. So I was at the arena last night. They had a watch party and I was there, and a friend of mine who is a huge Oilers fan as well. The two of us were screaming our lungs out because knowing what this was and what we were watching. And it was just the coolest thing. So yeah, anyway,
the part is that the audience can play a role, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you're in tune with them. You're supporting them. Anyway, we should start our conversation.
Yes.
I think we already have.
Yeah, we love this.
Good.
Practical application. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
It is. And speaking of that, getting into this discussion, because it's so on point, this whole idea that we talked about the last time, which was, and I thought, Karen, this was so brilliant, the idea of spirit over matter instead of mind over matter, which is really the core of what Mike and I are hoping to get into today. And that is the ability that when we are connected with this greater source and allow this source to work through us, that we can create our reality. And many people out there will know it as the law of attraction and things like that. How have you guys come to understand that?
I would say in many ways, it's just, for me, NDEs viewed largely the way they are, uh, contribute tremendously to our understanding of the nature of reality. And so what we see in NDEs, especially with a life review and its prominence, is this notion that we're really all in this together and we're here to help each other. It's kind of like we're sharing the dream of that one mind, but that ultimately we're just co-creating the emerging future with that God force of one mind. But it's something we can see as an ally. This is why I love the Oilers, their current scenario, that they're using this kind of thinking to help show potentially how higher soul can influence events. But the other important thing is, if you're looking at this through the lens of NDEs, you've got to realize that the ultimate guiding force is one of love and compassion and kindness. You cannot use this to torment and destroy other beings. This force is used for good. And it's that love of that creator that really gives it the energy.
But I think the word that I would like to highlight from what Eben just said is that we're co-creating. Mm-hmm. And so we have this idea, if you're brought up in the Western kind of religious thinking, that the God force is some kind of that the God force is the creator and we are the creator's subjects. But this shifts this around. No, we are fundamentally part of that God force. So we are getting in alignment, as the language you're using, getting in alignment with that God force so that it matches what we want. And it just exponentially increases what you're doing by aligning yourself with sort of that, I would say, highest and best good for all, you could say. That would be the big picture.
Right.
Yeah, I love that. And speaking of the Oilers, and for the audience that isn't following the hockey, they actually began at the very bottom of the league this year. They were losing terribly. And nobody in a million years thought that they would be able to be exactly where they are right now through the practices that they've had, and pulling this information from their teacher. And it's incredible to watch this sort of on the world stage, like watching this happen. And the one thing that their goalie Stuart Skinner has talked about a lot is the idea of understanding and having insight into emotions and our emotions, and what that has to do with the ability to align with this. And that we're really, when we become mindful, when we become in the moment, just like you guys talk about in living in a mindful universe, there's you allow this force to work through you. Can we talk a little bit about what emotion has to do with this?
Well, I think emotions are, that movie Inside Out 2 just came out, and I understand it's quite an education about emotions. I saw the original Inside Out because I have grandkids. Can't wait to see the next one. But I know that it's just breaking box office records, which is wonderful because it's teaching people exactly about this. And the problem is that we don't learn naturally, it seems, how to process our emotions. So we end up suppressing them. And when we don't know how to express a certain feeling, we just bottle it up and put it away. We've been taught, don't cry in public, don't have a scene out in public. No, you suppress your emotions. And it does this society wonderful good, but it doesn't do the individual as much good, because then you end up not processing those emotions. And so then when you do want to set a goal and, have something unfold in your life, those suppressed emotions get in your way. When you try to align with that force, your emotions are often, telling you the opposite. Oh, you want that? No, you're not good enough for that, right? We have all these sort of self-negative talk from these emotions that we haven't processed. And so what happens is when we're out in the world and we have a reaction, many of us think, oh, that thing out there caused this problem inside of me. But what I think these hockey players are learning, and what we're talking about here, is that no, when something happens, it's something inside of you that's causing that reaction. So if you can sort of settle down your reactiveness over something, that then brings you back into the ability to manage your unfolding reality. If it's just happening unbidden and contradicting what your, sort of conscious mind is saying, if your unconscious has this other thing going on, then you're not in alignment. So learning to process those emotions is very, very key. And I wanted to point out that Eben has experience doing exactly what these hockey players are doing.
Karen and Dr. Alexander's audio dropped briefly here, but Karen started talking about Dr. Alexander's parachute jumping career in college and how it is relevant to this discussion.
They actually used Silva mind control. That was the big thing back there. Jose Silva. I took those classes too back then. And it actually helped.
It helped us a lot.
But did you guys work on emotions or just visualizing?
We were mainly into visualizing at that time. But there was definitely a sense of visualization that led to the sense of satisfaction with successful completion. So yes, you were visualizing that emotion. And you were bringing the emotion of success right into it. But it was something we just started doing before competitive jumps. And this was all mainly free fall relative work. So very intense form of skydiving where you're doing it as a team, building formations and free fall. The clock is ticking because the earth is coming up. So you got to get your work done and get the formation built and then get everybody safely to where they can open their parachutes. And we found that by using Silva mind control meditation before some of these complex relative work jumps, they just started going more and more smoothly. And at the time, we were probably the only university or college team on earth that had a 10-man star team. We had 10 people who could put together an RW formation. Most colleges were lucky if they had 3 jumpers that good.
And Eben just reminded me the other bit of emotion that is so important here, because when you talk about the law of attraction or you read about, how it works, often you're told to just repeat affirmations. I am good enough. I am worthy, whatever it is. But if you're just stating those words without sort of a feeling sense attached to them, they don't have nearly as much power. So when you can bring, like Eben suggested, how is it that I'm going to feel when my goal is achieved? All those hockey players, we can imagine what it feels like to win the Stanley Cup, right? Mm-hmm. And so if they can bring that feeling into their visualizations as if they already have achieved it, that's another part of it when you're speaking of emotions. So sometimes they can get in the way, and then other times you need to bring them in to help activate that goal that you're setting.
Oh, totally. And in parapsychology, this is such a fundamental principle. And there's been many researchers over the years, 2 being Scott Rogo and another Dr. William Roll, who caught on to this really, really early in their parapsychological research. And they found that especially people that were expressing psychokinesis, so the ability to move objects and shift their environment and things like that, typically had very intense emotions and were focused in a certain way where either it was extreme frustration or the opposite. It could be just joy or something like that, where they were able to hone this in a way that stuff was moving around. And often they didn't know they were the ones doing it. They were attributing it to something else. But here was this sort of microcosm example of just how powerful our emotions actually can be. And I love, Karen, how you were just saying that it is really about the feeling place, not about the words and the language, but the feeling place of what it is you're wanting and visualizing, and not just kind of, putting up a Post-it note and hoping that it comes true.
Say the other important element in this discussion is recognizing and acknowledging, how important emotions are, but also the context of beliefs. You've got to be, especially in parapsychology, it's become crystal clear that you've got to examine your beliefs carefully, because not only the beliefs of the participants in the study, but the beliefs of the researchers, investigators can play a role in kind of what emerges at the end of the day in terms of a conclusion. So, our emotions are very important to monitor and pay attention to, but likewise, kind of our worldview and our belief system, which can also flavor what happens. And I would say that in general, the belief systems in our conventional Western society are far too limiting compared to the realities of human potential.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think our beliefs are especially important to kind of reveal just how, much truth can be revealed. Because researchers who don't believe that, parapsychological effects are possible have a lot more trouble demonstrating them than researchers who believe that they're possible and therefore get investigated ways that can reveal their nature. So, but that underlying belief system is very important to be aware of.
I think that's a big part of the problem. A lot of researchers are stuck in the idea of materialism. And I just read a mind-blowing book, An End to Upside Down Thinking by Mark Gober. Holy smokes, what a fantastic book. I mean, he talks about
I think Eben endorsed that book.
I did endorse that book. It's a great one. He's gone on to write some other really good work. But yeah, upside down is the best word for it, because it really does not fit the emerging scientific model about the nature of reality. Materialism is the thing that's been discarded.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, if you switch to idealism, the opposite, suddenly we have no anomalies. We can explain everything. So why aren't we going that direction? I'm always wondering.
No, it's so interesting to watch people who have mastered or are working to master this idea. And like, that's the one thing that I'm so enjoying watching the Edmonton Oilers, because watching their process when they fall back, being able to, have that negative emotion, but be able to manage that negative emotion and then work themselves back up into a better place. Because I think a lot of people, and I mean, I've done it, and I know, Mike, we've talked about this before. You've done it, where you get into that state where it's so easy to let the what is around us start to beat us down, and we take the what is around us seriously, and yet that really is past tense. That's what has manifested, not what's coming down the pipe. And I think that, like, for me, that mentality shift was huge. It was like, oh, wait a minute, this is all past tense. There's more stuff that's showing up, and you can change and pivot your emotional center when you make the decision to do that. I'm on the right track here?
Absolutely. And, a lot of people say you have to learn to control your emotions. And what you're describing is learning to manage your emotions, which I think is just a lot more realistic. Because, you could say also that my emotions are controlling me, right? Mm-hmm. So I have to control my emotions. And it's like, no. You just manage them. You have the knowledge that they're, occurring because of issues from your past, right? Not because some things are happening. It's so funny because some things that happen in the world, for example, will bother Eben. I'm just using him as an example, like, greatly, and they don't bother me at all. And then other situations will be the opposite. What is that? It's not the thing out there. It's the thing inside of us. And everyone has this. Right. And so it's the end to upside down thinking by saying, no, it's my inner world that overrides the outer world, mm-hmm. not the other way around. So when you start focusing on your inner world, then the outer world seems to rearrange itself to match your inner world. And if you're not paying attention to your inner world and you have all of this strife and, unresolved emotions and things like that, well, then it's no wonder your outer world looks a little amiss. And so that is a new way of thinking. And it sounds like that team, that hockey team, is doing that. They're focused on their inner world to have an outer world effect.
Yeah, the one thing I notice whenever they do a press conference is there's never, ever blame on the other team. I've never one time heard them say they did. If they didn't do, then we would. I've never heard that. It's always been, okay, how do we internalize? How do we refocus? How do we reframe this? And it's been so inspiring to see not only them taking that road, but also how it is affecting what is coming out. Like you were talking about this inner world affecting the outer world, and this has been such a prime example of it. Is just how can we, not beat ourselves up when something happens? How do we not beat ourselves up when we take a loss? Instead, how do we then work on whatever bugs we had that a loss materialized from those bugs, and start to work on those instead? And it's this sort of relationship of emotions and emotional engagement. And it's not really about the cognitive side, but rather the feeling place of it, like you guys were talking about, which I think is so interesting. And I want to get into the limiting belief area as well, because that's the one thing that you were just briefly mentioning, and I think that is really the key to some of this, because people, they get into these ideas and they're like, I'm going to create this thing, and everything goes sideways. So let's talk a little bit about limiting beliefs. How do you guys define that?
I think of limiting beliefs is just our general kind of assessment of certain circumstances, and our kind of statement to self about whether or not we have any influence to change it. And I think far too commonly, especially when the ego is mainly in control, because in this kind of discussion, I sometimes like to point out the little ego mind that's often tied up with addictions and other problems in life, and it uses fear and anxiety as its main tool, as opposed to kind of our higher soul version of self, which is not so tied down by kind of ego concerns. And that's where we can really take, kind of a personal soul responsibility for things. And that's where certainly I've come to realize, I know Karen would often stress to me this issue of inner versus outer world. It's something we discussed in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, as something called the supreme illusion. And that is just the fact that all that stuff going on out there, what you're actually experiencing is a mental model of kind of a dashboard, but you're not experiencing that reality directly. And I think it's an important distinction to make, and it's especially helpful in this kind of discussion where you realize, well, ego responses to certain challenges can be kind of blaming and deflecting, but higher soul is much more kind of able to kind of rise above those kind of petty sense of restrictions that the ego may have, and more kind of seek pathways that lead to whatever is possible. And to me, that's where, meditation, centering, prayer, all these ways of going within, then have a better chance of kind of manifesting organically the future I'd like to bring into the world, the kind of world of my ideals. The more I am able to rise above as a higher soul, this kind of notion of the higher good, and not succumbing to the fears and anxieties of the ego mind itself.
So I'll give you an example of a limiting belief. And I actually we wrote about this in Living in a Mindful Universe. And that is when it's very relevant to our conversation. When I first began to meditate, I couldn't do it. And so I believed I couldn't do it. And I thought, oh, I'm just one of those people who can't meditate. It must be reserved, for monks in Tibet who want to go into a cave for weeks at a time. And I had that image of it back then. And I mean, we all did, right? Because meditation didn't really start to become accepted sort of academically until around the year 2000. So, when the Dalai Lama asked, was it the University of Wisconsin or somebody around there to study the brain?
Well, he was working with Dops and other people, but
it was in the Midwest somewhere.
Well, I know in University of Wisconsin, they had meditation work that they were investigating. The Dalai Lama was involved with that. Yes.
Yeah. But so then I realized, because I knew about limiting belief systems, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm telling myself I can't meditate. How am I ever going to be successful at it? And so I started switching that belief. And in my mind, when I would go, oh, I just can't meditate, I would, no, you can meditate. Everyone can meditate. You just have to find the right tools that work for you. And that's when I turned a corner. And so that's an example of a limiting belief. I would give you another example. When I first met Eben, he, was very, the story. What was the big thing you learned on your near-death experience? And he tells me the brain doesn't create consciousness. And I'm thinking, what about the love? Where's that? Didn't you learn something about the love? And he said, that love is so powerful. That's for over there. It's very challenging to experience that kind of love here in the physical world. And I'm like, but wait a minute. No, you can bring that here. I've experienced that through different ways of meditation. And so that is what really intrigued Eben. And I was in this habit at the time of asking people, do you love yourself? And he took that question seriously. And he said, I can't. And it goes all the way back to his, being adopted out of a baby dorm in a baby home at 4 months of age. And so he thought he had been abandoned by his mother as a little baby. And that is the emotion that stayed with him. So as, decades later, do you love yourself? Well, my mother didn't love me. How can I love myself? Was still inside of Eben.
That was even after my near-death experience, although certainly the affirmative answer to that question of being worthy of the love of the universe began to emerge after my NDE. That's one of the most critical pieces of my NDE, was my beautiful guardian angel and all of that.
And that's what I would remind you of when he would say, no, I don't love myself. I'm like, well, wait a minute. What about the girl and the God force? And everyone is loved. And he had to work through that. That was still a limiting belief. And, I suggested he use that as a reference point to find that love from within. And I found it through just generating feelings of gratitude. That's what the Heart Math Institute suggests doing if you want to get in touch with your heart's energy field. Generating feelings of gratitude in the heart. And when I spent time doing that, that's when I discovered, it took a while, but that was love, not just gratitude. That was love in my heart. And it was from inside of me, not from outside of me. And it was several years later that Eben and I met. And I think if I hadn't gone through that inside of myself, I might not have been able to recognize the bond that we naturally share because of our experiences up until that moment. So
I'm always blown away hearing you guys talk, especially the congruence that the stories that Eben and I share. I mean, I was adopted at 3 months and told by my adoptive parents that, my birth mom had to give me up because she was too young and couldn't take care of me, and that she still loved me, all those kind of things. But for some reason, there was a filter in my brain that told me I was worthless, all of those kind of things. So I ended up with that exact same limiting belief. And I had to deal with it spiritually. There was no other way for me to cope with it other than to forgive and live a good life and try to begin to love myself regardless of what that was. And obviously, I have since found out that she did love me and thought of me every day and all of those kind of things. And now I have 2 moms instead of just one.
Yeah. We actually go through this phase of no moms and end up with 2 moms later on. So kind of an interesting paradox, but it's just fascinating. Karen and I call those things baby wounds.
Yeah.
Any of those kind of traumas we have when we're really young, negative messages from parents, friends.
We make up reasons for things that are happening. Like my parents got divorced when I was 7. That was my abandonment wound because I didn't see my father for many, 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 many years. But I feel like all of us have some kind of wound of separation that takes place just by leaving the spiritual realm to come to the material realm.
Right.
And so then it's no wonder if it's the case that our inner world creates the outer world, that kind of separation from source would cause this sort of angst that creates these experiences. So how interesting.
Well, I think it's a huge part of soul growth is how we kind of address those kind of challenges in life. And I love Karen's point because I've often thought that, all of us, especially in our heavily materialistic culture of the last many decades, growing up in this culture, especially for those who come in kind of spiritually advanced, there's some shock there, because the culture is not as accepting of it. But I think that over time, that's shifting dramatically, especially as the scientific support of this primacy of consciousness expands and becomes a greater idea that's more widely accepted throughout the population, that we're really sharing one mind, and this deep message of life reviews, that it's really the golden rule: treat others as you'd like to be treated, written into the very fabric of the universe. And the more we end up discovering the truth behind these kind of anecdotal experiences, like near-death, shared-death experiences, after-death communications, etc., that's what's helping this world to grow up, by an admission of these vast numbers of such experiences that tell us that there's much more to this world than just the material. And there's much more to this life than just being in a physical body. The evidence all of us can start to glean of our connection with loved ones who've left the physical world, is very important in kind of growing our worldview into something that's much more appropriate and less restricted than the kind of falsehoods of the materialist worldview.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. One thing I've noticed with people that I've just interacted with over the years, whether they be clients through parapsychology or just anything else, where I think a lot of people almost get hung up not so much on the limiting belief themselves, but on a secondary limiting belief, which is, I have to clean all these limiting beliefs up. And I've seen this so much. I used to know a girl who was a friend of mine, and that was literally what she did all day. It was like, I got to dig in, and I got to dig all the way back to when I was a kid, and I got to dig these things up. And the more she dug stuff up, the worse it got, because it was like, the more that she dug it up, it was almost like she was reactivating those emotions again. And stuff would start to happen around her, because she was reliving this stuff in effort, I think, to clean it up. But that wasn't really what was happening. And I've seen this a couple of times with clients that have said that they are experiencing different types of hauntings and stuff like that as well, where they go into these go into this going, oh, well, if I just dig this up enough, then I'll start cleaning this up, and then my environment and this will change. And I mean, and I've always been the big big supporter of the idea that you gotta deal with your emotional stuff. But it's almost like the retelling of the story is addictive. The ability to retell the story of the pain and going through it without making any progress kind of becomes addictive. So it's like a habit that they can't quite quit.
It sounds like a spiritual bypass. They think they're doing the work, but they're not really letting
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. That's exactly what it is. And I think I've known a number of people to kind of fall into this rut, but I think these beliefs have to be replaced by something new. Like, you can't just say, okay, that's it, I don't believe that thing anymore. You got to replace it with something else. Is that kind of right?
I would say absolutely. It needs to be replaced. But I would also say that, whenever you're talking about addictions, you mentioned that just a second ago in this kind of reference, those are ego concerns. I mean, the ego is all tied up with addiction. And often in kind of psychotherapy, you find that what they end up doing is a therapist will do kind of a ritual sacrifice of that ego, kill it off so that it's reborn. So these kind of shifts that you're talking about can be fairly large, and yet I think it's more just a shift in the focus and attention. And I know for me, this kind of 180-degree flip from materialist beliefs, brain creates consciousness, all the way over to idealism and kind of spirit over matter, was a lot easier shift than I might have imagined up front. Now, of course, I did have the catalyst of the NDE, but also by shifting one's focus away from self and kind of the egoic concerns and looking more to the higher good and finding satisfaction in bringing love and kindness, compassion to others, I think it's an easier step than a lot of people might think, because it's so natural and organic to make that move. And so it's not quite the wrestling, struggling match that we sometimes portray.
Well, also, one of the ways that I learned to release suppressed emotions was to don't attach yourself to a story. And so the way this would unfold is through using the recordings of sacred acoustics, which I think we talked about in our previous interview.
Yes.
The sound recordings with binaural beats in them, where they make your body very profoundly relaxed, but your mind is still aware. So it really helps you to create this hypnagogic space between awake and asleep. And that's a deep meditative state right there. So that's why these tones are useful to help people get into these meditative states. And it was one of the tools that really helped me get past my blockage. But one of the things I would notice is sometimes I would get emotional while I was listening, and I wouldn't know why. And I would search for why. Why am I doing this? And I'd find some story. And then I realized later, no, that wasn't it. And so I learned just if my emotions were starting to come up at the beginning of a recording or whenever during the listening time, I learned to just let that emotion come up, let whatever it was be expressed. Don't attach a story to it, and just imagine it being released. And so this would happen time and time again until I was finished. And I don't think you're ever truly finished. I think you think you're done and then you're not.
Yeah.
But
Definitely.
I would feel resolved, and then something else would come in and take it over. But a lot of that, it did involve crying. For me, I needed to cry, and I did not, I learned, have to attach a story to it. And so that's where your friend, your acquaintance who, attached herself to these stories, this, that, and this happened, she's all focused on the outer world, not the inner world, right? And that's what you just explained. But you can release your emotions without necessarily identifying them as it's happening. At some point, you attach a story to it, but sometimes I feel like you're just making it up to make it fit. And you're not, it's just something we do and not necessarily the truth. So we need to be careful when we're releasing emotions. We really are letting them go and not just staying attached to them through the story. And that's what these recordings helped me do in a very natural, organic way. And I didn't even realize that was happening. It just was learned all through trial and error. But what a useful tool that was.
I would agree that certainly the sacred acoustics recordings, which I've used an hour to a day for the last 11 or 12 years, have been tremendously helpful. And a lot of it is because it does provide a very ready access to that hypnagogic space, which in meditation and centering prayer can be one truly of higher soul, whereby little ego mind and linguistic brain and all that is not interfering. So there's a great value in being able to achieve that kind of hypnagogic space between awake and asleep in meditation or centering prayer, because in many ways, that's what allows us to kind of move beyond the ego, and it no longer is trying to trap us with fears and anxieties and stories. And of course, never forgetting the power of gratitude, because for me, gratitude has been right at the heart of so much of my progress, is just being grateful for every breath and the events in my life. And that includes gratitude for the tough things, gratitude for things like illness and injury, which in many ways can serve as kind of stepping stones for the higher soul to advance and evolve. Our ego would never admit to letting hardships or willing hardships to come our way. And yet higher soul, especially when aware of the kind of eternity of soul, is really a place where you can rise above a lot of that and start to use the angst and energy of those kind of negative kind of hurdle events in life, use that energy for growth and positive transformation.
I'm just sitting here nodding my head.
Right? We do.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, for me, the adoption wound is a beautiful example of something that allowed me to grow and to come into a true knowing of this love of the universe, through my NDE and through all this processing, through the beautiful guardian angel who was so important there, and not knowing who she was after my coma journey, but finding out months later that she was very importantly related to me in ways that I had not previously understood. So for me, it's all been positive growth, and that positivity absolutely acknowledges the negative aspects of parts of the journey that were real challenges for me in my life.
Well, I know this was a number of weeks ago. Stuart Skinner, the Oilers goalie, he came out with something in a press conference that so relates to what we're talking about in terms of gratitude, where the media had said to him, the opposition team and the audience were booing you. How does that affect you? How can you go out into the arena and having these people boo you? And his reply and ended up going all over Edmonton because everybody was. I wasn't surprised, but I think everybody else was. And he said, but what is there to be upset about? He basically said, what a wonderful thing to be grateful for, that I am in the position that I can go out into an arena and get booed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm playing
Yep,
for my
exactly.
passion.
Absolutely.
And
So
yes, and it was like my whole being just lit up when he said that, and he just said, and this is the opportunity of a lifetime, and it is a blessing to be able to go out there and get booed by this audience. And it just so impactful and so I think it's an attitude like you've been talking about, this attitude of gratitude. And when you walk out into these circumstances, how you are receiving what's going on around you, it doesn't have to be something that's responsive. You can find gratitude in things that you would never in a million years think that you could find gratitude in, but it's there. It's somewhere there in the fray of all of this. And but that quote just really stood out to me. One of the
that
other
brings to mind something else, when you brought up the person who got so into finding her limiting belief systems, replacing them all, and so on. So people can get a little carried away on this front too. Some people in the middle of a big conflict, they're like, what's my lesson? What am I supposed to learn? Oh my gosh. And I'm like, look, you just lost your mother. You don't need to worry about the lesson right now, right? Sometimes we just need to feel the emotions of the moment. But sometimes people get really carried away with that and then don't allow themselves to have those emotions. They're so hung up on what's the lesson. Sometimes you don't know that lesson until maybe 10 years later.
Yeah.
So you got to kind of relax on always knowing the reason of why something bad happened, right? Because there's always a reason, but you may not know that reason until long later. So sometimes people will challenge me and say, okay, well, why did my wife have to die after that horrible bout of cancer? Huh? What is the reason? And like challenging me for, having the answer. And I'm like, I don't know.
It's not for you to answer. It's for them.
Yeah, it's for you to explore. It's a process.
Mm-hmm.
So people can get frustrated that way too. That was the point.
It's so valuable. And I think, coming out and, saying to people, especially when they're grieving, oh, it's just, there's a reason, it can come off as something that's very dismissive, but at the same time, there is truth in that. That, I mean, might not bring comfort in the moment, but having been someone who's lost so many people throughout my life, I definitely have come to understand that on a really, really deep level. And it doesn't mean, like you were saying, Karen, that you get it in the moment. It probably isn't going to come in the moment. In fact, your grief, I think, prevents that realization from coming in a lot of ways. Like, you're way out of range of that source energy and that source message. At that point, it's like your only job at that point is, like, exactly like what you said: sit with the emotion, sit with the pain, and be with it, be with yourself, and like self being the ego and all of that. Be with the self in order to be able to go and move through it. And I mean, that type of thing, it's like a wave, it comes and it goes and it comes and it goes. And eventually you kind of end up, up that emotional scale, as long as you're doing the work. But it's doing the work and finding those little bits of joy, along the way, because I'm a firm believer. And after just being in parapsychology and hearing people's experiences about spirits and having my own experience, is that they do not want to leave a legacy of pain at all. They don't, I don't think that anybody passes over and says, you know what, I hope they're grieving for the rest of their life. They just don't do that. It's they want to see the people around them happy and joyful and remembering them in a happy way, I think.
It's not where you get revenge. It's where you, seek kind of atonement and um, kind of resolution coming into
Yeah.
oneness. And for me, it was a very important consideration after my NDE to realize that many of the people who before my coma I might have seen as my nemesis or my enemy there to prevent me from getting something I wanted in life, after my coma, it became very clear that in many ways we were just near and dear soul mates, me and that person who stood my way. And we're just
Yeah.
trying to teach each other especially challenging lessons.
Yeah.
So it really kind of opened me up to uh, be more kind of wide in my view of the possible relationships we might have with people and how we use that to help in the learning and teaching process of soul transformation, soul growth.
What I've seen just throughout the years of doing this and interviewing people and just doing my own work is that there really is, like you were saying, no external person that can do this for you. There's nobody out there that can do this for you. And you can have all the books and you can do all the things and you can go to all the lectures and whatnot, but at the end of the day, it really does come down to sitting down and doing our soul work to move through this. As a final question for you guys on this, because I know you'll probably have a lot to say about it. What do you think when people hear the idea of law of attraction or anything like that? What do you think people are not getting that they need to get about this concept? What is the misconception, and what have you seen that people are making the most egregious mistake about this?
Well, I take this from, I will use The Secret movie as an example.
Mhm.
So The Secret came out, what was that, 15 years ago or something, made this huge splash, maybe longer ago, but it made this huge splash and people were talking about, oh, The Secret, The Secret. And it was about the law of attraction. But the
Yeah.
way that I understood they explained it was the bit that we brought up earlier. You write your little, I want my Cadillac. They were focused on a Cadillac, first of all. And they were, I will have my Cadillac. And you put that on your little Post-it note and you see that on your mirror every morning. And to me, that was empty. To me, that was, why do you want a Cadillac? To me, it's what is the feeling that you want to have when you own a Cadillac? What is that? Is that freedom? Is it status? Is it success? What is that feeling? And then focus, instead of the Cadillac, focus on the feeling. And maybe the universe will realize that you don't need a Cadillac. You need this other thing, right? So
Yeah.
it's opening up to this trust that you don't necessarily have all the answers, but when you're in alignment, because that's how we started all this, how do you get in alignment? Once you're in alignment, then that co-creation is something maybe you never could have thought of that finally gives you that empty feeling. And Eben was talking about, addiction as an ego disease. You're searching for something material to fill that spiritual hole. And so how is a Cadillac going to, provide how is a material object going to fill a spiritual hole? You want to fill it with that satisfaction, not the object. So I would say the law of attraction would be better practiced focusing on the feeling you want to have. So when you think, what is heaven on earth? What does that feel like? Find that feeling and don't worry about how you're going to achieve that. Let the universe co-create with you to find that answer.
And the other thing I would add to that is, again, for me, a huge amount of the knowledge around these kind of questions and answers comes from the world of near-death experience and dying experience. I mean, you find the same things like in Christopher Kerr's book, Death is But a Dream, which is all about hospice work and terminal care. And what you find is at the end of life, the really important things come out. And the important things are about relationships with our fellow people.
And love
connection.
Feeling
That's what's so important. And what people recognize as they approach the end of their life is that if there's any improvement to be made on their life, it usually involves things like loving relationships,
And not a bigger house.
and not a bigger house, and not a Cadillac.
Right.
No, you don't find material stuff there. In fact, if you survey near-death experiencers, you find that they pretty much routinely come back much less materialistic than they had been before. They also come back less religious, but more spiritual. And they come back acknowledging the importance of love and connections with our fellow beings and what you've done to bring higher good to the world. That's the stuff that has real currency, in that heady environment of what it's like when people are leaving the physical world and having to kind of look back on their life and assess what they've done and where they've fallen short and where they've succeeded and what's really worked for them. And I would say that you never find out that getting that Cadillac was the big, answer to their life challenges. But it's always much more about relationships and how we treat other people. And the more love and kindness and compassion we can hand out, and never forget gratitude. I mean, all of those are the ingredients that I think lead to much more success in life than the secret and the Cadillac in the driveway.
Yeah, so I think because of that particular movie, it reached a lot of people, and that's what they learned about it. And that's where, people could just learn a little bit more to get the real power of it all.
Well, and isn't it the truth too that at the end of the day, people are looking that like you were saying, that feeling place of purpose, of love, of all of those things. And logically, I think everybody knows that the material things aren't going to get them that thing, but that's what we tend to do. We tend to just think, oh, if I just had this one thing, then, oh, my whole life would be better. But we look throughout our lives and, most of those things we've probably attained to some degree, and we're still, in that want phase. Like there's something that's missing.
Fill the hole.
Right. It never ever fills the hole. And I'll sort of put this on a final note with our amazing Oilers. One of their players said recently, was Zach Hyman, who said, when you focus and you aim for the goal of happiness, that's when things start to pop. And it's the happiness first. It's the fulfillment, the emotional fulfillment first. And then all of a sudden positive things, start happening. And that's when that kind of a thing pops up. That Cadillac might show up. But it's finding that first. So I couldn't agree with you guys more. And this has just been such an incredible discussion. People, go out there and buy Living in a Mindful Universe, because you need this book. We've had it all over our site and whatever as well. And you guys, we just can't thank you enough for doing this again. And we hope we're going to drag you back here soon.
We love it. Love talking with you guys. Obviously, a lot of resonance, a lot of very kind of positive information. So,
common life stories. It sounds like
common life stories.
You never know when you're going to hear your story, and I keep hearing it from Eben.
Well, and I would just add that all of us kind of have that abandonment wound coming in from the spiritual to this material world, especially in our culture. And it's been kind of a shock. But the good news is the culture itself is shifting to more fully accept and kind of foster and cultivate this kind of knowing throughout the populace. So it's going to be very beneficial to people, especially knowing kind of the scientific support of this beautiful vision of the connectedness of mind and shared purpose and meaning in life.
Well, and isn't it wonderful that we're not alone with our stories, right?
Yeah.
We can identify because, oh my God, other people are having the same thing. Who knew that was going on, right?
Right.
So I love that you shared that with us.
Yeah, and I think the being removed from the material side of attachment early has its benefits. Being able to step aside and having to learn this early is I think at the end of the day, even though it creates a wound, it actually there is such wisdom to be gained in knowing that we can create that connection with something bigger than us that isn't stuck to something temporal like a person.
Well, and those challenges, that's how we learn and grow. Eben always says, your goal is not to be sipping champagne on a yacht. That's not where you're getting your spiritual growth. You're getting it through being abandoned when you're 3-4 months old and so on. So,
yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you guys, we will do this again, and we're just so grateful again to have both of you. It's just having you guys in our lives has just been so special. So we're just thank you so much.
well, thank you both as well.
Yeah, we love talking with you all, and thanks for doing what you're doing to get this out to the world.
And of course, we had another fantastic conversation. Not a surprise at all.
It always is. And this one in particular is so much fun because there's many times, I guess, in the world that we get to see these examples of psi and parapsychology in the works, in real time, in real life. But this is like a larger than life example. And it's so cool.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people, when they hear the phrase parapsychology, they don't immediately go to the law of attraction. They think ghosts, poltergeist, things knocking around in the middle of the night. But it's more than all of that.
It is. And this stuff is really the core of so much of it. This gets into things like quantum entanglement, all sorts of incredible, not only theories, but things that have been tested and experimented with time and time again that have been peer reviewed. And so much of the crux of parapsychology and the paranormal actually comes back to things like mind over matter, being able to manipulate the environment through focus.
Yeah.
That's what this is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see examples of it in my own life, very starkly. I mean, we've talked about a number of them here on the show, but just recently I got to do something very cool that I can't talk about just yet because of an NDA, but it was something that will take my career to a whole different level, which is just mind-boggling. And how did that come to me? Like, I didn't seek it out. I did not seek it out. What I'm always seeking is, okay, what can I do? What can I put into the universe that is positive and all of that kind of stuff? And funnily enough, when you put good out, good comes back in spades. So I think that's what's going on. I don't know. I really don't know.
I couldn't agree with you more. And actually, because we talked about the Oilers and whatnot this episode, that's the one thing that one of the Oilers actually talked about during one of his interviews, Zach Hyman, where he was saying the more positivity that you can put out there, and not fake positivity, but actual gratitude, mindfulness, being alignment with the moment, the more you can do that, the more stuff starts to happen. And he's absolutely right. I mean, it's not about, slapping a smiley face sticker on an empty gas gauge if you don't have that energy.
Right.
But it just comes back to being in alignment with the moment and being able, and when that happens, you're not giving any resistance into the universe, and stuff starts to pop.
I do a few little things every day. I do a few things every day to kind of get my brain aligned with spirit, or whatever you want to call it, the universe, whatever, nature. But one of the things I do at night before I go to sleep is I write a gratitude list of 5 things that I'm grateful for, and I share it with a friend. So, I'm always sharing my gratitude as well. So that I always go to bed feeling like I'm grateful for stuff. And people are like, well, what if I'm not grateful for things? Well, you can be grateful for just breathing in and out is something to be grateful for. Having had food today is something to be grateful for. And maybe you didn't, maybe you didn't. But there is something that you can find to be grateful for every day, regardless of your situation. I mean, I've been down in the dumps, physically, emotionally, financially, all of those things. And I've always sort of been able to find something to be grateful for. It's a practice that I've done for years and years, and it really is paying dividends, strangely enough.
Yeah, it does. And I think you hit on something so important, which is even in the worst moments, there is always something, and it might take coming right back to something that simple, which is, I can breathe today.
Yeah.
It might be something that simple. It's, it doesn't have to be something gargantuous and massive. And usually the special things, the things that you can focus on that are meaningful, are smaller.
Right.
They are something simple, and you don't realize how simple or special they are until you actually get into the feeling place of realizing, wait a minute, like this moment, whatever this is precious, whether we, are in an argument with the moment or not. But this immediate moment and that mindfulness that we saw with Stuart Skinner, the Oilers goalie, that he's talked about, that meditation, being able to sit in that space, and not fight the moment, even when we're having a hard time.
Yeah. Some friends of mine who are sort of my spiritual guides in life use this phrase, the magic magnifying mind. And whatever we focus on increases. So if we're focusing on the negative, if we're focusing on the problem increases. But if we're focusing on the solution, if we're focusing on gratitude, abundance increases. It's really strange. It doesn't seem like that should work because, I need to fix my problems. But strangely enough, the solutions to my problems have come through my being grateful for other things. I mean, I'm grateful for some pretty simple things. I'm grateful for the interactions I have with other human beings throughout the day. Like just a chat with my birth mom or my mom and dad or my sister or you, just like I'm grateful for those little things every day. And that's what I choose to focus on. So I could focus on, what's going on in the world and all the problems inherent. But if I do, I feel miserable. It's not ignoring them. It's acknowledging them, saying, yep, they're there. But there are other things that I am so grateful for in my life, and that's what I choose to feel.
Absolutely. And I think, too, people tend to think that worry is accomplishing something.
No.
If I'm worried about it, right?
It's accomplishing giving you cancer and making you sick.
Exactly. Like, it's one of those things where you can have those situations and address those negative situations, but you don't have to hang on to them for the rest of the day.
Right.
Like the worry itself is not getting you anywhere. Mm-hmm. So you could turn around and shift your perception or shift your focus onto something else, and it might not specifically go and change that negative situation, but worrying about it's not going to change it either. So you kind of have this decision to make. Well, do I want to be right or do I want to be happy? I'd rather be happy.
That's my philosophy. Mark Twain said, I've had a lot of worries in my life, most of which never happened.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Yeah. So, oh well.
Absolutely. And I mean, here we are having this, incredible discussion with Eben and Karen, and just seeing this stuff play out in our world. And guaranteed, when people become conscious of this, they'll see it. You can't unsee this information. It's one of those things where when you start to examine where your attention is and what seems to be growing in your experience, you can't deny it, you can't unsee it. So it's just one of those things that I think the more people experiment with it, the more it'll make sense.
You got to play around with it to learn how to do it.
And the focus is, this is one thing that they teach in the Monroe Institute with our friend Alan Evans and Joe McGonigal. These guys talk about the notion of being able to let go of the baggage. One of the first exercises they do with people who want to have an out-of-body experience, for example, or a remote viewing session, or or psychokinesis or anything like that. First thing they have them do is put their worries in a suitcase or a box or something like that in their mind, shut the box, let it go. You can open the box whenever you want, but it doesn't have to be now.
Yeah.
And I think I use that all the time. And here we're, back talking about parapsychology, but that's what this is. This is the root of it.
I am so happy that we talked to those folks again. It was really great. So thank you for joining us on this amazing expedition, dear listeners.
And remember, there is no line between the natural and the supernatural. All is consciousness. Until next time, stay curious, friends.
Supernatural Circumstances is a co-production of Entity Seeker Paranormal Research and Teachings and Good Egg Studios. This podcast is part of the Curious Cast podcast network. Theme music by Corey Johnson of Catalyst Records in Edmonton, Alberta. You can learn more about Morgan Knudsen at entityseeker.ca and learn more about me, Mike Brown, and listen to my show, Dark Poutine, at darkpoutine.com. Feel free to email the show at supernaturalcircumstances@gmail.com.
Being in a Big Brother house is like a dream come true for me.
Mics, cameras, competition.
Are you ready to play Big Brother?
Let's go. Are you ready
This is big.
for a big summer?
Oh my God, I'm in love.
You lied to my face.
We're coming for you.
I'm gonna burn this sucker to the ground. What a game.
Expect the unexpected.
What a game.
Big Brother, all new Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays on Global. Stream on Stack TV.